Operator.
I'd like to report a truck driver that's been endangering my life.
What's your name, sir?
David Mann.
How do you spell it?
David Mann.
Hey, folks all right?
The car broke down.
I can give you a ride to Bell's, a little diner about 5 miles down the road. They got a payphone, call a tow truck, they just come in and haul you out.
You can choose between $90,000 or 90,000 donuts.
Better pray she's alive.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Do it.
There, he was on time
Why
this
don't you
week.
do it?
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which, I mean, we're a year into the podcast now.
So you got a lot of hours.
Yeah, I think there's something like 25 or 26 Patreon episodes, so
Yeah.
Double that, because we talk about 2 movies every week. That's how many movies we talked about. So if you haven't made the jump, consider doing that. And speaking of which, I didn't pull it up here because I am, as much as I think I'm prepared, I'm never fully prepared. But we have 2 new patrons to thank this week, and
Nice.
that is Ellen Bailey
Thank you, Ellen.
joining us, and also Joseph Rossett. So thanks so much to both of you guys for joining us on this sleazy journey and getting all those bonus episodes. We appreciate it. That's the one plug. What's the other plug? iTunes,
YouTube,
SoundCloud,
all those
Spotify.
things.
We're on Spotify now.
Yeah, pretty much everything now.
Stitcher. I think we're on every podcast listener of choice.
Yeah.
But whatever one you're listening to us on, if you've been really liking the show, go give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps
Please
us
do.
find new listeners, and we really appreciate that as well. And there, the plugs are out of the way. Welcome back to another episode. Thanks for being with us. 2 weeks ago, I think, would have been the last time free listeners would have heard from us, and that was a big one.
Yeah.
We counted down...
Almost 2 hours.
Yeah, Jamie and I spent 2 hours counting down our top 10 genre movies of 2018. We had a lot of really great feedback about it. Lots of people. No one yelled at us, which was nice.
That was nice.
I appreciated that. I mean, we did tell you on air not to yell at us.
Yeah,
so
my
maybe-
one buddy even was like, "Hey, 2 Cage movies. I like you." So,
Yeah, Nick Cage, he's back.
Yeah. You're the Cage, baby.
So Jamie and I both counted down our top 10 genre movies of 2018. That was 2 weeks ago. If you haven't heard that episode, go back and listen to it. It's free. It's for everyone on whatever podcast listener of choice. But last week, patrons would have got their bonus episode, which they would have heard from us just a week ago. And that was, we were talking Sui Hark. We did Once Upon a Time in China, 1991. With Jet Li, and then we also did his more sort of fantastical, sort of dreamy fable, Green Snake from 1993, which Jamie and I both watched for the first time and absolutely fell in love with.
It too. So many odd elements to that film, but all of it works really well.
Just a gorgeous snake going on there. I mean, really creepy watching them
the half snake, half
slither
human
around
scenes.
the rooms
Yeah,
and
they
stuff.
were creepy as hell.
Very, very interesting film, and very morally complex for a fairy tale or fable.
Yeah, it wasn't
story.
just like that fantasy good versus evil thing. It went into some odd,
I wasn't expecting a sexually repressed
places.
monk, that's for sure. So that was last week's Patreon episode. If you want that episode again, that's patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. But this week, we are back with a guest, the first time in I think like a month or a month and a half that we've had a guest.
Like
but I brought a special one on. One of my close critic colleagues here. We have Keith Ulick, who I believe, Keith, you are the critic for The Hollywood Reporter and also Where Else? Tell me.
Yes. Hello, guys. Hi, Josh and Jamie. Yes, and as I've said to my hosts here, pardon my hungover karaoke voice. It was a fun Saturday night. Let's just say that. But
nothing wrong with that.
Yes. Nothing at all. Yes. And yes, I write for Hollywood Reporter. I'm one of the critics over there. They have a whole roster basically, and I've been doing a lot of work remotely there for certain festivals, and sometimes on the ground, as I've done with Toronto, where I often see Josh, and maybe we'll meet Jamie someday. So that would be nice. Yes. But I also write for Slant Magazine, where if you whenever whenever this goes up, you may be able to access my review of M. Night Shyamalan's Glass very soon.
Oh God! Okay,
So nice.
without saying anything, thumbs up, thumbs down. What are we talking here?
Yeah, because we're actually gonna go see it this week. So, but don't spoil nothing.
It's. Have you read his book in that he wrote? I mean, you probably wouldn't read it, but it's about how he feels he's solved the problem of America's education gap.
Shyamalan?
Yeah, you don't know about this book, do you?
No, I guess not.
Yeah, he wrote a book a few years ago where he basically says he has 5 ways that he can fix America's education gap, and he calls himself a moonlighting movie maker, which is hilarious. And the author photo is one of the most, ridiculous things you'll ever see. But it's sort of maybe, I guess, proto-Randian or something. I don't know
God.
I mean, to compare him to Ayn Rand is ridiculous. I mean, I don't even know if I can compare the philosophies necessarily, except that it's clearly driven by some weird sense of ego, which if you've seen Lady in the Water is pretty clear what he thinks of himself in that regard. Yeah. But Glass, in the sense of now this trilogy of superhero films, seems like it is a culmination of that very ethos that he wrote in this book. So honestly, it feels like a dissertation and discourse about where the real superhero is humanity.
Oh, there we go.
I don't think I've spoiled the thing there. So anyway, that's a long way roundabout of saying I read it Slant Magazine, and check out my not really positive review of Glass very soon.
Very cool. Well, thanks for joining us, Keith. Now
I'm almost more interested now.
Yeah. We already got our tickets in advance here, and now we're gonna.
I'm prepared.
We're ready.
Yeah. I don't know if Josh is ever going to come at me for like going down on Halloween. That sounded awful. Oh my God. Okay, but being negative on Halloween, but
Keith,
next time, yeah. Yes, darling.
We have our disagreements, but every time I love reading you. So that's just how it goes. I mean, you wrote my favorite review of Mission Impossible Fallout, which was a negative review. And it only served to clarify the reasons why I liked it. And that to me is more valuable writing than anyone agreeing with me. So
yeah, absolutely.
You are a better man than most, Mr. Lewis, let me tell you.
Thank you. Now, Keith, we asked you to bring 2 films to talk about on this show. Now, what were those 2 films that you ended up bringing, and why did you pair them together? What's the reasoning here?
Yes, so we have from 1971 Duel by Steven Spielberg, and from 1997 Breakdown, starring Kurt Russell, directed by Jonathan Mostow, who I guess you might know from Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines and what is it called with Bruce? Surrogates with Bruce Willis, where he plays kind of an android, I think. Jonathan Mostow never made another great movie after Breakdown, but we can touch on all this very soon. Paired them together, I guess superficially we can say, because they're both truck thrillers. Both about killer trucks or killer truck drivers, in some way, shape, or form, and the kind of suburbanite / yuppie who has to go up against them and kind of regress to a more prehistoric state. I find them both very interestingly complementary in that way. Additionally, and I guess this is a good point to bring this particular theme up, I have a kind of highfalutin theory about these two movies. Not only did they share this narrative DNA, but Breakdown came out in 1997, which was the year that Spielberg did The Lost World, which is the sequel to Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park being, of course, a big movie in which CGI in 1993 was kind of like a watershed moment for that. And I feel like Lost World is the moment where he kind of pretty much effectively turns his back fully on just, I guess, straight ahead live action movie making, where I think the computer, both in his movie and generally in the Hollywood movie at large, kind of takes very big prominence, which then gets solidified, I'd argue, with like Lord of the Rings, where I think CG and live action is mixed to a huge degree that then has rather epochal effects, maybe culminating in Avatar. Now you can see how my weird mind is working. But I think it's interesting that in '97, then we get this truck thriller from Jonathan Mostow. I believe it does have some CG effects in it, but it really mostly seems like a work of live action and miniature stuff in the way that Spielberg did, in Duel. So I feel like there's some kind of thesis to be written about the study of a sort of the Hollywood thriller or the genre thriller, since we're on Sleazoids podcast, which focuses on genre and such. Between Duel and Breakdown and what that kind of arc represents. And there's probably a lot of movies you could fit into there. That's sort of my highfalutin thesis. Maybe we can explore some of that as we talk about the films.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, two films that sort of speak to each other, maybe formally, but from two very, very different time periods.
Yeah, and you definitely see some references in Breakdown. That's for sure. Like certain things, the way that they filmed the truck and him stopping and just kind of staring at him and things like that. They seem directly to reference each other. So.
All right. Well, let's get into it then. We're going to be talking Duel.
Yeah, let's do it.
Get back in the bus, please. Please, come on, back in the bus.
All right, we are talking Duel, the 1971 American TV movie.
It was a TV movie.
It was a TV movie
I didn't know
first.
that.
Yes.
Keith
Go ahead.
No, you
Sorry.
can go, Keith.
I think you were going to say something though, Josh, about something I sent you. So maybe you should do that.
Okay, yeah. Keith actually sent me the original cut of the movie, and I watched both.
Oh, okay.
So Keith and I both watched because the original TV one that aired, I think it was on ABC. It was
It was a movie. It was a movie of the week, and I think this is the point to mention that technically, I would say there are three versions of Duel. There is the original TV movie. It should be pointed out that Steven Spielberg directed. Richard Matheson, who I think many people will know is the writer of many of the best Twilight Zone episodes, penned the teleplay, which is based on a short story of his. The versions are basically there's a TV movie. It was shot, it was budgeted for 10 days. They shot in 13 days, as I'm to understand, because, it went a little over. 10 days for editing, and they had to, so it's like, you can, even looking at the TV movie, which I actually just watched for the first time, like, just before recording this, because I kind of wanted to have it fresh. It's amazing how much he packed into the shooting schedule that he had and the editorial effects that he and his crew kind of created. But again, I'm getting off the track, which is there's a TV movie. Then they expanded it for a theatrical release. They added two major scenes specifically, which now actually, as I've just looked at those two major scenes again, have a very Stephen quality in a way because they both involve children. One is Dennis Weaver's character, David Mann, calling home to his wife, and the kids are on the floor kind of playing around with toys and stuff. And, and the wife is henpecky and everything, which seems very much in keeping with Stephen's interestingly odd relationship with women. And
also with distant fathers.
and distant fathers, absolutely, and then there's a scene involving a school bus where a bunch of kids are being, and interestingly, and I would point this out, a very multicultural bunch of kids, which I don't think you would necessarily get from a lot of people. Spielberg is always interestingly cast, and I will quote Armand White, God help me, but he did very rightly point out in The Lost World how Jeff Goldblum's daughter, who is black in that is never a point that's brought up. So you're kind of left to just, it's basically just treated as completely normal. She could be adopted. It could be that, maybe her mother is black and Jeff Goldblum is white and she's mixed race. You don't know. And it's just kind of like that sort of sense that he sees the world in as a multicolored place is there, and I appreciate that. It is interesting to see the TV movie version, which feels extremely like tense and tight, like not an ounce of fat on it. And I don't necessarily think the new scenes add fat per se. It's just interesting. You get a little bit more of the Spielberg perspective added to what I'd say is the Matheson perspective, which is just very honed and very focused. I should also mention that the third version that I'm referring to of Duel is the version where, when it was shown in theaters, they masked it for 178 or 185, and so I think it's like the Blu-ray is 178, and it's possible, I guess, when they showed it in theaters that it was like 185. So maybe there are 4 versions technically, but the aspect ratio shift. I mean, I think they've talked about it. You can see sometimes the crew in the sides of the frame and stuff, which is what happens when you rejigger things like that.
Well, when you shoot something for a TV aspect ratio, and then all of a sudden you go back to the film and try to expand the frames, and you were like, oh crap, I didn't mean for that to be in the frame when I was filming it.
Yeah, which is why I was so happy. Like, there's a John Carpenter TV movie, Someone's Watching Me, with Adrienne Barbeau and Lauren Hutton, and they make available both the reformatted 178 that they did, just because that's what people do nowadays, I guess, because it's the new pan and scan, is letterboxing things that shouldn't be letterboxed. But they also make available the 4x3 square thing. So I'd really love a package of Duel down the line that kind of takes into account all these different things. This is also a point where I should mention the soundtrack is kind of different as well, from the TV movie to the theatrical cut and DVD.
Right, because we should mention the reason it ended up getting that theatrical release is because it was such a huge smash on television. It was a 70-minute...
Definitely the best television movie I've ever seen.
It was like a 70-minute tense thriller that just captured everyone, and then they were like, well, shit, we should release this in theaters. And then it wasn't long enough was the problem, which is why it has so much additional content.
Right. And was this his first directorial debut for at least a feature-length film?
I want to say it was his second, but it was his first to get, because he did another TV movie, but it wasn't, from what I understand, broadly recognized.
Because something I thought was like that spoke to me right away was seeing like Spielberg's tight directing right away, like this early on. You can really see how the action sequences and the way he would have close-ups of people's faces as he's sweating as the truck driver is going towards him and things like that.
You can see Jaws in this movie. Like you can see the blueprints for what he would eventually turn into as a craftsman.
The truck is the shark, basically.
Exactly.
I think the really big first effort. Well, there's the short film Amblin, but then he did the Night Gallery episode with Joan Crawford, where Joan Crawford is blind. It's an amazing episode because he's doing things with the camera as people say on when talking about the whole behind the scenes thing of that, where it's just like nobody had ever done anything like that before. And 71, because 71 was big for him. I'm just looking back at like some of his other efforts there. I think Duel is technically what we would say is the first like real movie, even though it began as a TV movie. It was the only one that went into theaters. There's this really interesting episode of the anthology series, The Name of the Game, where it was an alternating anthology series between several different leading men. And for this one, the lead of this, I think it's called LA 2017 or something like that. And
we're there.
And basically he, the guy who's the lead in this, gets thrust into a future Los Angeles that is where all of humanity has gone underground. And the environment is poisonous and stuff like that. And it's very much a proto-Minority Report. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. And I mean, post-Duel, it's basically like he did this really good TV movie, Something Evil, with Sandy Dennis, And then there's a pilot for a Martin Landau series called Savage, which is like whatever. And then he goes and then he goes into Sugarland Express and Jaws and Close Encounters, and then we basically got him, in theaters for forever.
Forever, yeah.
Yeah, no matter what he makes, it's heading there.
Oh yeah.
So, anyway, yeah, I guess maybe let's focus on Duel. What thoughts do you have? Questions or whatever?
Yeah, well, maybe we should just establish quickly the premise for anyone who hasn't maybe seen it. But largely, it's about a traveling businessman played by Dennis Weaver. I think his name's David Mann in the film.
David Mann, Mann.
Yep. Absolutely. And he kind of finds himself in a bit of I'm going to say it's a bit of a masculine crisis, both with his, particularly with his wife, who sees him, I guess, I don't know he's not a fighter.
I was gonna say, it seems like he
macho.
avoids problems. Like the phone call that he has with his wife. I'm pretty sure she mentions that she was sexually assaulted, and he's just kind of like brushes it off, like no, you weren't, that kind of thing.
He didn't want any confrontation. He's very.
And I feel like this is the movie in a way is kind of like the universe manifesting this trucker from hell, and he's like, you know what? Deal with the problem now. You actually have to deal with this. This isn't something you can just drive away from or hang up the phone. This trucker's out to get you.
Well, and it reduces himself to something more a little primal. He can't sort of, because it's interesting because Spielberg has the idea of the truck as like something mechanical, but it's also really dilapidated and rusty and broken down. Yeah. And while he's driving on the road, this truck, I think he intends to pass the truck because the truck's driving slowly.
Yeah. And there's like smoke coming in his face.
And he's like talking about pollution.
Yeah. That's the first line of dialogue, I think, is, it's pollution, or whatever.
Yeah, while he's listening to a radio show about a guy who is terrified that he's no longer the man of the house because he's not the breadwinner or whatever,
Yeah.
So
he's talking about the census thing on the radio or whatever, and he's like, I am the silent majority and everything like that, which, this interesting political counterpoint, I suppose. So
well, it's very interesting that he's going through a kind of crisis on what it kind of means to be the head of the family or the man of the family in a kind of a more modern suburban world, and then he has a journey where he gets to kind of live out I would say a reclaiming of that masculine primal energy.
Something I really like too is the beginning where it shows just that first person perspective of him leaving his house and then just traveling.
That
through the
was
city.
also only in the theatrical. It wasn't.
Because I really liked that
movie,
setup. It was almost like showing this relaxing driving. This Sunday driving.
He's pulling out of the garage. He's driving through the city,
which is leading him into the hell that he's about to have to face. So I liked that a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess this is the point to say that I think both versions definitely have their merits. I have to say, I really do appreciate the TV cut's stripped downness. I mean, it really just feels like, despite the interlude with the snake lady and everything, who actually is also a character in 1941. She returns to again be terrorized. I think this time by John Belushi. But aside from that, and the scene at the diner. And everything. I think it's mostly just like Dennis Weaver and the truck, and the whole family life stuff is just the only line that really refers to that in the TV cut is I think the gas station attendant at the first station he stops at. He says something and like I don't know, like you wear the pants or you or something like that, and Dennis Weaver. Like, not in my house.
Yeah, I guess Spielberg's eventual theatrical version kind of makes a little bit more overt the subtext of the film.
Okay,
but the sort of meat of it in this, how it sort of those ideas kind of sort of minutely infect what is like a very, very just tense thriller otherwise is still there, especially when we get into scenes like, because even when the truck's not on screen, the truck is always a presence in the film. Even in the diner scene. The diner scene is actually one of my favorite scenes of the movie. Which is
it's that when he has his inner monologue and he's just like looking at each individual and trying to analyze them.
And he's having fantasies about confronting them and actually addressing this problem.
Yeah. It's great.
And he
It shows that he kind of like
the truck has scared
analytic.
him so much too that he's projecting now that kind of energy onto all of these dudes because he sees that they're all wearing boots, because we never see the truck driver, which is a really
you
good
only
choice.
see the cowboy boots.
Yeah, you only see his boots, and you see him vaguely in the frame, maybe in the background, kind of in the shadows in the truck. Like you can see hands operating the wheel basically, and that's it.
Yeah.
So
But
it is interesting that he alludes to like some human. You know what I mean? Like I would think that maybe he would just show the
Tinted
truck
windows.
only. Yeah, and that. But it's interesting that he decides to have some person in there as well, just to give him, I guess, a sense of paranoia for the main character.
Who is it? Who is this man that's more macho than me, trying to run me off the road in this very stalkery way?
Yeah. Because everything else about the truck reads it's almost just like this environmental thing, like this, force of nature, even though it's, a mechanical machine.
No, and I mean, when the truck is ultimately vanquished, I mean, the driver just vanishes. He's not anywhere.
Right.
And so it's just, it does kind of become, it's very much of the 70s existential moment, I guess, that kind of took somewhat from Euro art cinema to a degree. I can sense some like Antonioni and stuff in this. At the same time, it also feels very much of a piece with where Hollywood was turning at the time in terms of, really, I mean, Molly Haskell writing in From Reverence to Rape about how Pacino closing the door on Diane Keaton in The Godfather is, male Hollywood shutting out women, which I think is fairly apt, frankly, albeit, it still gave us some very interesting films and stuff, but very much yeah, go on.
I was going to say that Duel actually kind of reminded me a little bit of Wake and Fright, which kind of feels of a similar moment.
Yeah, for sure.
Of just a real crisis of these, because I mean that's also a very intentionally male-dominated film where there's only, I think when we talked about it on the show, we said that there was one woman attendant at the bar and one woman attendant at the hotel, and there was the daughter of the one guy.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was a bunch of drunken, crazy men satisfying their urges sexually and violently in a kind of drunken haze purgatory.
Pretty much like a hell. I mean,
and then that he also gets reduced to a kind of primal version of himself, and then is basically forced back to just going back to his teaching gig. And you're kind of like, how do we reconcile these kind of base desires and like a society that clearly doesn't function, by letting them run amok. And there you feel a similar kind of, I guess, that was kind of an early 70s moment at the time. That I guess this is just the way a lot of guys were feeling at the time. And you see that translated here to Duel as well.
Yeah, and I mean, where it works best is when you sense that they're grappling with these things. And I mean, casting Dennis Weaver in this is sort of, you were talking about his inner monologue earlier. I think a lot of that dialogue is very on the nose when he's speaking to himself. And sometimes I watch it and I wonder, would this be better without it? And then I'm kind of like, but I like it because Dennis Weaver is saying it. Because Dennis Weaver is such a weird character. He's not so fully macho that you can't conceive of him having an inner life. You can conceive of him having one, and and being in Dennis Weaver's head, if you've seen Touch of Evil and basically anything Dennis Weaver's ever been in, is a weird, fucked up place to be.
He's awesome in Touch of Evil, which I believe is also the film that Spielberg saw that made him want to cast him in this.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, indeed, and it's he's giving him a lead role. He's kind of like in a way he can be an everyman, I suppose, but he's an off-kilter everyman. And so like even when he regresses to the primal state and it's kind of like initially, like at the end, I think he's running on adrenaline and he's very happy about it, and then he just kind of like stops being happy and just sort of sits down completely depleted and everything.
Well, yeah, and he's like hooting and jumping for joy. Like it's such a weird celebration. Like it's imagine like Arnold Schwarzenegger like doing something like that. Like he's not a particularly macho action hero.
He's not the guy that walks away and doesn't look at the explosion.
Yeah, but he's also not quite just average either. He's got like this weird middle ground. I agree with Keith entirely on that.
Yeah. So
very cool. And I mean, I think that because who was the writer? It was Matheson, right?
Richard Matheson.
Yeah, I think that it's actually his, because it's based off his short story, and I didn't know that he wrote for the Twilight Zone, but that actually makes a lot more sense now having seen this film. And it's a pretty little ingenious idea for a short story, but also, I mean, a huge reason I think that this works is the way that Spielberg visually conceptualizes the premise, with this camera that constantly has this truck kind of like slightly bobbing into frame sometimes, because he establishes this is Dennis Weaver's space. This is and he kind of captures sort of like the autonomy and the power of the car, which is also a big deal, that he's more powerful in this car, and he has this really awesome like red flashy Plymouth or whatever it is, and he's driving around, and then he starts asserting himself because of the power he feels he has in the car, and then he comes across something that's bigger than him and more sort of wild and unhinged and unknown. And the way that Spielberg chooses to visualize that is most of the time, stay in the car with Weaver, or just slightly outside the car, attached to the car, and it's a lot of the truck kind of moves into the background a little bit, and he kind of trains your eye to constantly be watching that background, waiting for that truck to kind of bob in, or watching the mirrors. I love it when the truck just slightly moves into the mirror, and he's constantly kind of framed from these low angles where the truck is very imposing and coming down on him.
And what I even like about what he does with the trucker itself, like you can tell that the trucker is just fucking with it to such a high degree. Like the scene with the kids, because you think he's gonna come to be menacing, and then he helps the children just to fuck with him personally more.
That's some of the genius too of Matheson's writing on it too, because it takes into account the generally accepted courtesies of the road. Right. And that you should let this guy pass you because you're going slower. And he's like, no, I'm going to actually pull in front of you and then slow down intentionally in front of you. And it's a very frustrating experience that leads to a kind of angry, unhinged paranoia overall, which honestly, having seen other Spielberg movies, I don't know that there's another movie that's like as angry and unhinged and paranoid as this. I mean, paranoia would be a technique that Spielberg would use a lot in his thrillers that he would do, later thrillers, especially like Minority Report and War of the Worlds, and I mean, even his spy stuff like Bridge of Spies. But I haven't seen anger and this kind of unhinged anger from him before or since.
I don't think I have either.
I would probably personally argue that there's an anger and a paranoia in Munich.
True. Munic's amazing. But kind of put to different ends. I think
although I think what's interesting about Munich is that it is among its many things is that it's a deconstruction of narrative suspense. And what that means, because I think that they're constantly, because they're Mossad agents who are trying to, bomb or kill Palestinians, and and they constantly try to make it clean and satisfying, and it never is that. It's always messy. It never the deaths never happen on the exact beat that where it would be satisfying in a way, like which is what Spielberg is so good at, usually just in terms of the mechanics of suspense, which like when Sheriff Brody shoots the shark, or shoots the air canister in the shark and blows it up. Or when the T-Rex comes in Jurassic Park right at the end is sort of the Dino ex machina, I suppose. It's
a very traditionally satisfying way to frame that kind of suspense and violence.
And actually, that kind of goes to another larger point about the 97 Spielberg and that kind of pairing up with Breakdown. I also feel Lost World is the moment where he really starts to experiment, because 93 he has Jurassic Park and Schindler's List, which I think are both like perfect movies. I'll put those in quotes. And whether you have issues with them narratively or morally, politically, otherwise, I mean, and I know lots of people do, maybe even I do to some degree, but I think just stem to stern, they are shaped and like perfectly, for what they are. And then I feel like from Lost World on, he's really starting to experiment with not being perfect in that way. And I think like AI is kind of the culmination of that to a degree. And then that's kind of informs a lot of the later part of his career. I mean, it's a larger discussion, but, I do think it's interesting that 97, that's the point where what he did in Duel, someone else is kind of like, recapitulating that in a way, which is why I picked this other movie, and he's moving off in this entirely other direction. So...
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally really get a lot out of Lost World, and specifically how it's so different from the other Jurassic Park in some of its set pieces. But I mean, I guess if we were to sort of cap off Duel a little bit, was there anything else that any scene maybe that particularly stood out to you?
To me personally,
yeah.
Or to.
Because for me, the scene that really, because I mean, like I mean, I guess the reason we can't get into a whole lot of it is that this is an incredibly simple film.
Yeah.
That talking about, as soon as the back and forth with the truck begins, that is the film until the end of the film.
Right.
Where we get a bit of a climax where he eventually does take down the truck. But there's a little bit of shading that happens kind of in the middle where we're outside the truck. And I already mentioned the diner scene because I think it's awesome where you get into his headspace where he's imagining confronting these people, and all of these guys are wearing like the denim and the cowboy boots, and they got the hats on, and he's like, any one of these guys could be that trucker. And there's so much suspense in how he's like, do I go and talk to this guy? Do I call the police? Do I do this? And then each one leaves one at a time, and he's waiting for them to get into the truck, and they get into a different truck. Right. And every time, all of a sudden, you're sitting there, and the camera's following these guys getting into their vehicles, and then you realize it's not him. And immediately, like, we whip pan back inside where he's like, oh my God, he's still in here.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a lot of visual ingenuity that Spielberg presents to this that, would later go on to define his career and how he would adapt other people's works.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of simplicity here, too.
No, and I would say because I just watched the TV movie version, like literally for the first time, I'm very familiar with the other version just because I am a Spielbergian in many ways, as I think people who have heard me speak or read some of my writing know. It was interesting watching. It was really, you ask about a scene, and kind of like watching the shorter version, it's more like what was absent from it that I was familiar with, and actually how that it's the kind of thing, like a lot of people say Spielberg always keeps his movies are too long at a certain point, and he never knows when to end something or whatever. But I feel like a lot of his additions or a lot of his like not loginess, but just kind of like his his sense of wanting to keep you in something past the point where maybe others would say this is the natural stopping point, actually can often lead down some productive like thematic paths and everything, which is why seeing the shorter version, it's interesting to see that the big stuff that's added feels very much him, and kind of in whereas in the shorter version, I guess, like, the scene with the school bus where the trucker helps the school bus, that's very interesting because it kind of adds a layer of complexity that to the villain that is not there in the TV version, where it's basically just you can basically feel like there's not even a person behind the wheel. It's maybe just like it's a force of some kind. And I think that there are probably a lot of people who would say that stripped down version is better, because it's very tight, it's very focused. It really doesn't feel like there's any fat. And what I would say is that Steven Spielberg likes having some fat on his movies, and sometimes it does unbalance them, but other times I feel like it leads us down productive paths. And I would actually say, like, the fat that's in the 90-minute version of Duel, the theatrical, is interesting for how it illuminates some of his own personal obsessions, whereas I think he was basically a hired gun on this. So as brilliant as the direction is on the TV movie, and as much as I think you can read some of his technical adeptness into things, just from that, he really becomes more evident in the theatrical cut with those additions because of the family stuff. Because I mean, that's his probably his great theme is family and its tensions and its and the hope he has, I guess, that people can, resolve their differences, which can sometimes come off, a bit wish fulfilling and sentimental in ways. But again, not unproductively. But
his parents' divorce really kind of fucked him up.
Yeah,
he did a lot of movies about fathers abandoning families and what the modern man is called to versus being called to family and.
But really, none of that family stuff is in the TV version, which is interesting then because it's just like man and truck. And that's very much, I'd say, Matheson. I'm actually thinking if you haven't seen the Twilight Zone episode with Agnes Moorehead where there's no dialogue, but she's trying to, she basically is trying to attack these invaders from outer space. And then the twist of the episode is that you find out that the invaders from outer space are U.S. astronauts who have landed on a planet of giants. So yeah, and it's this amazing thing where you're just kind of kept in Agnes Moorehead's like perspective the entire time because she's just like trying to attack these things that are attacking her, and they're like little action figure things. But like at one point, one of them sticks a knife through a keyhole and everything, and it just like cuts her, and she's like and it's terrifying. It's absolutely fucking terrifying. And then you get the little twist and stuff, but you can see how he like working in the Twilight Zone 24 or 25 minute thing. He pared stuff down to the to an essence, and that's what's interesting. In terms of scenes, it's interesting what's absent in the in the shorter TV cut, and I really do hope that's more widely made available, just as a point of comparison, because I think you can see it then gives you even a more productive entree into the theatrical cut, where stuff is added that I think is very much more in Spielberg's wheelhouse. So,
well, yeah, and it kind of gives you a feel for what maybe Spielberg was envisioning on set when he was actually directing the performer, and he was being like, "Here, this is how I envision this character's background
right.
and what he's feeling and why he's feeling these certain things as this situation is unfolding."
Right.
But I think we're going to enter the reductive rating round on this one for you, Keith. This is the part of the show where we remove the words and the nuance, and we, for our bookkeeping purposes, give the film a number between 1 and 5 or whatever rating system you'd like, and we keep it on our ongoing ranked list that we've got going of everything that we talk about. But this section has also turned into closing statements where sometimes there are a lot of goddamn words. Yeah. And
so feel free to say whatever you like with your rating.
For me, this is a really, really strong 4 for a lot of the reasons that we've already mentioned already. I like the constantly ratcheting tension. It was awesome that Keith sent me the original TV version of this film, because basically that film is just an exercise in constantly ratcheting. It almost never gives you any kind of relief. And when you think it does, when he gets a second, like he's walking into a diner or he gets a breath, all of a sudden he fills that with all of his own paranoid feelings and thoughts. Yeah. So you really don't get that at all. And what we get is just a slow transformation into a more primal version of himself, akin to something like Awake in Fright, or again, Hills Have Eyes, which has just come up on this show so much. But that also kind of has a similar transformation happening there of the sort of more modern family being reduced into that. But what Spielberg adds here, and what Matheson adds here, especially with the truck, is something more sort of interesting about because I love when he gets out of the car to confront him and he's like, man on man, we're finally gonna duke it out. And the truck's like, no, fuck off. We're going to do this in the truck. Yeah. So there is something specific about these sort of like rigid mechanical machines that they've built, that they're using, and the power that it allots both him as someone who maybe feels displaced in the scheme of the modern man, that this car gives him a realm where he can maybe get some of that back, and we kind of see that happen at the very end, where he in the big climax takes the truck down. And I love the sequence of the truck driving off the cliff and how all of the shots when the truck is dismantled at the bottom there, it's shot like a sea of like corpses of these two cars that have kind of destroyed each other.
Yeah.
Also, I feel like I just need to quickly interrupt there and say that the sound effect when the truck goes over is different in the TV cut versus the theatrical cut. The TV cut, I believe, has the roar that actually is the Jaws roar when Jaws gets killed.
Oh, that's awesome.
And you know, they're like, ooh, I can't do it. I mean, it's impossible to do it. But it does sound like it's either down mixed or not there in the newer cut. You know, I mean, there was also some controversy when Jaws was released on, I think, Blu-ray or something, or maybe DVD initially. And I think in all of the theatrical versions now, when it's DCP, it's a remix soundtrack with a lot of, you know, worse sound effects, and you lose.
That's such
and you
a weird
lose some
choice
things.
to do that.
Yeah, and you lose some things that you kind of really need in the mono and stuff, the mono soundtrack and such. But you know, it's I do like the I like that it has a creature's primal roar.
Which again would make more sense too when we get to the shot of it down below where it does look like a corpse. Like it looks like a creature, a being of a force that he has taken down. It does feel like hugely powerful that he has overcome like a beast. In like an ancient story, a prehistoric story, maybe something like that. You know. For all those reasons, 4 for me. But for you, Jamie.
I'm also gonna give it a 4. This was just really cool to see early Spielberg, and I personally haven't seen that one that you were talking about, Keith, Munich. So for me, this was like his most angry Spielberg that I've ever seen. You know, it was just gritty, a lot of, you know, that rust on the.
Jamie for you, Keith. Jamie's going through a lot of this stuff for the first time. So
I'm the newbie.
But it's a lot of fun watching a new person's reaction to it, because I've probably seen. I maybe have like 3 or 4 Spielberg blind spots at this point. That's it.
I'm used to Spielberg. You know, I mean, I've seen Schindler's List, but I'm also used to like E.T. You know, things like that. Minority Report. Just more, I guess, big budget and larger than life stories from him, and having him do something that's so stripped down and tight like this. It was really cool, and you could definitely see his. You know, what he was going to do with his action later on, early in this film. So, and also just to say, what I loved about the end there, just the tight editing with like the close-ups of his face. To one shot of the truck, you know, just hurtling at him, and then another shot of him, you know, just sweaty, and like there was a real tenseness to it, and I loved it. So I'm gonna give it a 4.
Cool.
For you, Keith.
My turn.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I picked both these movies, and maybe you can predict where it's all going to land, but I got to go 5.
Nice.
Because I for this one, I mean, you know, I love Steven Spielberg's movies tremendously, and I actually think this is a quote that's often attributed to Jean-Luc Godard, where he says that a great movie becomes popular when it's misunderstood. And so I feel like there's a degree to which Steven Spielberg, you know, the most popular artist in movies potentially ever, is thought of rather restrictively, I would say. And there's a great article by the CinemaScope writer Andrew Tracy, who you all might know, being in Canada and such.
Yep.
And he wrote about it. Wrote about Jaws at Reverse Shot, and which is an online publication that shares some of its writers with CinemaScope. And it was an amazing piece on Jaws. And the only quibble I would ever say to Andrew is his first line, which is, "What is there left to say about Jaws?" And my argument is, depending, because everybody is unique in their own ways, in their own perspectives, and it's really just how you express that opinion and write about it. There can always be something new to say about even the most popular movie or the most popular entertainer. I feel like there is a degree to which, there are ways in which we have not scratched the surface of this particular artist, because He's still alive, and so we cannot see the full body of work quite yet, and that's going to
how many
change
people
things.
seem to dismiss a lot of his later work too.
Right, exactly, and you know, I think so. First of all, if we are able to see the full body of work at a certain point, that'll be interesting, and also it's
starting with Duel and ending with Ready Player One would be pretty insane. Not that I say that Spielberg's going to die or that Spielberg shouldn't stop making movies, but like that would be an incredibly fascinating beginning and ending to a career.
Definitely would be, yeah.
No, yeah, it absolutely would be, and but you know, I mean, it'll go on as long as it goes on, but it's just like I feel like.
Well, what's he making now? West Side Story? That's what he's making right now.
West Side Story, I believe, is the next one.
I'd
Yes,
love
that
to
should
see
be
what a musical looks like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's you know, this is in many ways you know, a Rosetta Stone of his career, you know, and it's actually now I see even more so considering the varying versions of it, so I mean that's why I would go as high as it is, and I feel like even, you know, beyond all the pleasures that you get, the very basic, very you know, inspired way that he can just, you know, as Hitchcock would do, and I think say play the audience like a piano or whatever. I think that's the quote that you know, I think there's a lot here in just the way he communicates information in what I call the Spielberg shorthand. You know, it's just like when you see it, you just know it, and it's so uncanny and so mysterious. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't know how you do it, but it's this very mystery of how you make this, you express yourself in this way that I just kind of going to keep studying. You know, beyond all the he just makes these crowd pleasing movies. You know, I don't think anyone sticks around as long as he does at this point, and there's nothing there worth studying. I would even argue,
just get the shot. Just the kids are gonna like it.
No, and I would even argue about this I would even argue this for someone who I'm not fond of, as I think Josh probably knows. I can't stand Christopher Nolan, and yet I would say I think there's a lot there to unpack. Though I would cede that to someone who's interested in the task, which I am not. So
I am. I'll take up that mantle. I'm gonna do a whole book on Interstellar at some point about how this inhuman mathematician wants to like solve the love.
Yeah.
So there you go. So yeah, basically summing up, 5 from me. I think
awesome.
it's a Rosetta Stone to his career, and you know, a fascinating movie in that regard. So among many others.
Well, I would agree, and I think that's going to wrap it up for Duel on this one, but we're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Breakdown.
Yeah, let's watch Kurt Russell in some khakis.
Yep.
Let's do this.
You the fella looking for his wife?
I saw what happened. We're gonna be watching you.
When do I see my wife?
So Jeff should start walking.
Get down on the ground!
Police just one's in on it.
What do you want?
Kurt Russell.
You better pray she's alive.
Breakdown.
Where is she?
All right, we're back, and we are talking Breakdown, the 1997, also an American road thriller. This one directed by Jonathan Mostow. Also involves a bit of as Keith mentioned at the top of the show, a sort of superficial relationship to Duel, in that it's also a California set desert truck thriller where there's a truck driver who has some we'll say some ominous plans for our suburban dad hero. Actually, I don't know if he has a kid. I don't think he does.
The truck driver?
No, the
Kurt Russell and his wife. No, he just has a wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, he needs his wife. He needs his wife.
But it's on the way, because, you know, we see him in his Jeep, we see him in his sunglasses and his khakis. Kids are next.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Exactly.
Yes,
That's the order.
yes.
He cut his metal hair,
Yes.
got some khakis, kids are up next. Exactly.
Kurt Russell definitely looking like a snack in this one. That's all I'm going to say
That
about
polo
that one.
shirt.
Yeah. 90s Kurt Russell did it for me. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He did it for me too, baby. So.
I found the similarity of location very similar right off the bat, because I watched Duel and Breakdown basically one right after the other one, and
just get that that orange kind of that feel that just gives off heat.
Yeah, that heat. But what's interesting is this one opens with like some really like ominous drums.
Yeah,
he's riding around in his nice Jeep. He's got the leather. He's got the AC. He's got the CD player, which the truck drivers kind of are a little salty about.
The very 90s cell phone. Which
the biggest thing you've ever seen.
which they're out of range and they can't use. I should also mention that the film was shot in varying locations. I don't think it's ever necessarily specified where he specifically is. There are several California locations, but they also shot in Utah. I'm seeing in Arizona and Nevada.
Oh, interesting. So just lots of places where there's heat.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's kind of more a. What I think of it is it's kind of like a paranoid yuppie view of flyover country.
Right. Well, it definitely starts off that way, especially when we get into, because it kind of opens, and I was watching this for the first time. I was kind of flabbergasted by the overall structure of the film. I actually had to go back.
It's like a mystery instead.
Well, yeah, and it opens, and I was like, okay, so we got like a little bit of the yuppie versus the locals, like a Deliverance, like a Hicksploitation style thing happening here.
Yeah.
Where they're,
I'll be right with you, cowboy.
Yeah,
sorry.
Exactly.
The woman in the diner who's like, looks like she ran out on you, cowboy. I love her so much.
Yeah, this upper middle class like Jeep driving couple that they have a run in with the locals, and that's gonna turn into horror as the wife gets kidnapped by a truck driver, a seemingly nice truck driver who helps him when his car breaks down, which is I assume where the title comes from.
Played by the great JT Walsh, who is unfortunately no longer with us.
He's excellent.
I also would like to make note of the title and what I think it means, and especially you're talking about the kind of tribal drums of the Basil Polidorus score, which there's a whole other score that apparently he wrote for this that is on CD somewhere, but I think they kind of took out a lot of it, and I think it's very effective just in sort of its sparer version. But there's the kind of tribal beat of the drums and the way the title kind of like flashes over the image of the map coming together and stuff. It feels like it's a heartbeat almost, that's kind of, and as it's coming towards you and it absorbs you into it. I've said to people that I feel like this movie, the title is, yes, it literally describes a car breaking down, but it also describes what I think it wants to induce in its audience, which is a complete physical, emotional collapse. Which I also think is what Kurt Russell's character goes through, and to no uncertain ends.
Well, I would say that's how it more sort of emotionally fits in with Duel, where you see again these people being stripped down. Yeah. You see these people who have kind of like these kind of like outer surface layers that all these locals are making fun of him for about his leather seats, and I think he has a great line where he's just like, oh man, all I really need is that truck. I bet you that truck does good for you. And the local looks back and he's just like, why would you want that piece of shit when you got this, man? Like, what the fuck?
You're gonna make me do every line. That's MC Gainey, who who you might know. He's the unfortunate full frontal guy in The Descendants by Alexander Payne. He's chasing after George Clooney, I think, at one point. Was it The Descendants? No, it's not The Descendants. I'm sorry. It's
Sideways.
It's about Schmidt. It's about no, it's Sideways. It's Sideways, right?
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay. I was gonna say I was like I recognize that scene that you're describing, but I don't think it's either of those movies.
It's Sideways. It's Sideways. I'm mixing up Alexander Payne, but yeah, it's Sideways where he like runs out after I think it's Thomas Hayden Church and Paul Giamatti together, and he's like full frontal on that. And this is in his thinner days. Yes, when I love that line. Like, why would you want a piece of shit like that when you got a ride like this?
Yeah, exactly.
he's so. And then later when he's like, you should have got the bumper sticker that went along with that car. Rich asshole both looking for trouble. Yeah, it's very Hicksploitation. He just plays that to the hilt. So I love that about it.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say pretty much the first half of this film kind of, that triggers a certain kind of paranoia in him, and the first half of the film kind of milks that for what you would think would be just the Hicksploitation horror, like a Hills Have Eyes type thing, or a Deliverance type thing, where you get like, these yuppies are very terrified that they are going to be attacked by these more, again, a lot of time established as a more animalistic type of person who is used to surviving with we'll say less means. But around the time that his wife gets kidnapped by the truck driver, because their Jeep breaks down on the side of the road, and a truck driver comes out and kind of helps him out. Mm-hmm. And he says, I'll take you both in my truck, and I'll take you to the next stop, and you can call someone, and we'll get you all figured out. And he doesn't want to do that because
he's a man.
Well, yeah, he's like, I can figure it out. And also, it's a new car, and I don't need this guy's help. And also that interaction at the gas station doesn't really necessarily make him want to
trust the locals,
to trust anyone. So. He lets his wife go though, to go and get help, and then he's gonna wait there, and then he finds out that the cables have just been sort of like pulled under the bottom of his car, and that they intentionally messed with his vehicle so that would happen. And then he gets it working, and he drives on over to the I think it's a diner. It's the a few miles
Bell's
away.
Diner.
Yeah, Bell's Diner, where the truck driver's taking his wife, and there's a lot of unhelpful locals who are like, didn't see her. And again, there's that the paranoia kind of seeps into it, where he's like, did they see her? And they're just pretending that they didn't see her, or like
there's that distrust, which we didn't mention it in Duel, but there's that scene where he is getting the radiator hose looked at. And he says you should get it replaced, and then he doesn't. And then at the end of the movie, it's literally a problem for him that he doesn't. Yeah. So it's kind of that distrust of the locals, even the people that are trying to help you, that leads them into more problematic issues. So it's interesting.
Well, because there's a certain level of condescension, and then a certain level of genuine fear and paranoia, which, as the film unfolds, we find out is slightly justified by J.T. Walsh, who plays, of course, he plays a guy named Red, and
Red Bar.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll say the depth of his scheme is much more complicated than I actually anticipated when the movie got started, and gets really, really fascinating around the time that Kurt Russell gets ran off the road and into a river with his Jeep. And talk about sort of like the more primal, natural world sort of making its way into the film, when it literally sucks up his Jeep.
It's moving along too.
Yeah.
No, it's and also I guess we're gonna have to mention the 90,000 donuts, little clue that where he's able to understand what his wife told him they had in their account, so that they can confirm the amount of money that he can try to get, even though they're very much down on their luck and don't have that amount of money. But it's like they have this connection that kind of keeps him safe and keeps him alive and such, and and I feel I really like Kathleen Quinlan in this movie, just because she has to do a lot with a little, and I think she establishes this nice rapport with him at the beginning that has some underlying tension, and then she's gone for most of the movie until the end, and I kind of use this this term that's. I forget. I think it's Stanley Cavell, maybe, is the film theorist who talks about comedies of remarriage, and he talks about like the 30s comedies, romantic comedies that where it's like these romantic partners who are at odds and kind of like come to this reconciliatory thing in some way at the end. I'm probably not describing it fully as it's supposed to be, but I kind of look at Breakdown as a sort of tragedy of remarriage. where, you know, he loses his spouse and then they come back together. And the fact that she is the one who executes the final coup de grace
is such a badass moment.
Yeah, that moment shocked me to my core. I had to watch it again. I was like, did that happen? I was like,
she does it with like, you're fucking right, motherfucker.
Yeah.
There's some hatred in those eyes.
No, and then that's what's interesting, though, because I call it a tragedy of remarriage, though, because I think, you know, I do believe this movie gives you that sort of primal, like, you know, sense of fulfillment.
Yeah.
That, you know, and yet what I love about where it ultimately goes is that they too, like David Mann and DUEL, are, you know, they sit down depleted at the end. And I don't think that, you know, they have their coup de grace moment and everything, but it's like they sort of sit there in this, well, what do we do now kind of thing, in much the same way that I think David Mann does, just kind of sitting down and like throwing rocks, you know, off the cliff. Like they've ceased to be human, I think, is how I feel it. And I'm so glad that they decided to, Mostow and his producers decided to cut the original ending, apparently, which I believe was shot, where, you know, the whole stuff with the truck happens, they're on the bridge, then like cops come around or whatever and check on them or something, and then
that would have sucked.
And then they start walking off, and then the wife turns to Kurt Russell and is like, next time we fly, you know, it's like... No,
I would
that's not real. They didn't shoot that.
To be honest, the joke, like I would have liked the joke because it's just so stupid after all that shit that goes down. But yeah, that would have ruined it completely.
No, I mean, what I love about it is that basically they are, you know, because when you are reduced to a primal state, if you're just running. If you're just running on adrenaline, if you're just running on instinct, you know, it's just like you do these things that really are outside. I guess what you might do is in whatever your personal class or you know, economic status or whatever it is, you would dictate that you do. And if you breach that like, you know, to like a very insane and intense degree, I think you cede some aspect of your humanity, you know. And it's just like, and so I kind of, you know, as much as there are heroes and villains in this piece, I really love that the last beat of it, and also the way that J.T. Walsh's character, his kind of, you know, life is revealed in dribs and drabs until you realize that he's actually a family man.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of, I think, really complicates a lot of things as well. And you know, my as much as my sympathies are very much on the, you know, I think on the standard narrative track to a large degree in this movie, I also think there's ways in which they shift sometimes. And it's just kind of like, well, these goddamn yuppies just came in and like upended his entire operation and revealed him to his family. And now his family's fucked. Oh, poor JT Walsh, you know. And it's just like, you know, like JT Walsh is so good at playing the villain in a, what's, you know, it's not, I believe him as a person. You know, and even, and I mean, one of my favorite moments is when he's about to give the villain speech and Kurt Russell is just like, you fucking kicks him in the face. You know, and it's just like, he stops him in his tracks. It's like every time you think you're going to get like the big kind of like villain moment or whatever, it kind of, you know, it is subsumed by, you know, this instinctual and violence, and that is very satisfying, I have to say.
Yeah, or it's undermined, right, by like the reveal of his family that you mentioned, where it's kind of like there's some shading to him.
Yeah,
that
and there's such a darkness to having like has boxes and boxes of people's belongings. He's been doing this for years, obviously, and then just the thought that he also has a child that loves him. In fact, he holds a gun up to Kurt Russell for his father. You know, like. So they have a loving family, at least in the sense of, you know, they care for each other. But then to have this element of what he's been doing, obviously, for years, and they don't even know about it, it does really complicate his character. Because you have something that's like, he's obviously able to have a family that's loving or whatever. But then on this other side, he's killing people by the hundreds.
Well, and it's awesome because as an audience member, you see the kid come with a gun, and you're like, oh no, that's just a kid. Like,
yeah, he doesn't know any better.
And then you also immediately project innocence onto the mom as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the confrontation
And then she
happens.
screams, "Do it!"
Yeah, and then when the mom like lets out like this bellowing, "Do it!"
Yeah,
I was like,
Yeah.
whoa,
for sure.
And I mean, I guess in fairness to her, a guy came into a gun and threatened her family
honestly,
and everything.
Yeah. From her perspective, I totally understand.
But at the same time, it wasn't.
I get what you're saying.
It wasn't exactly what I expected from the mom in that situation. So
I mean, let me give a little background to my history with this film, because I saw it in first run in 1997. That's how fucking old I am. It captivated me right away. But this is the movie that it was the movie I had seen the most times in a theater in the same day. I went like twice to see it. Like later in its run, I saw it in the morning, and then some friends who hadn't seen it, and I was like, "Oh, you haven't seen it yet? Let's go again." And actually, that last viewing in the theater was the best viewing I'd had of it, because we were in a theater that had packed house, insanely good sound, and just like so everything of that finale where the truck is hanging off the fucking bridge and stuff.
Which is just a bonkers finale.
Yeah, it's awesome.
We were just like climbing in our seats, like, oh my God. But I tell you, every time I have seen this with like a larger audience, from the minute the kid comes in with the shotgun to the end, it's just like everybody is just like,
yeah.
And they don't, and you could, I remember, I think it was like at that fourth screening that I saw it in 1997, there was some guy who was like, oh, shit! And I was like, and I was just like, Yes, the kid just comes in with his shotgun, and you don't expect that that's going to happen, and yet it makes perfect sense that he would do that, and it's just like, so I mean, when I say about the title, like, induce a breakdown, I mean, I think this film builds in a certain way, and you think it's one thing, it kind of switches, and it becomes this slightly other thing. I mean, I know Siskel and Ebert criticized it for not being the original Vanishing, which was a Dutch thriller where like a woman gets kidnapped as well, and the husband goes to find out what happened to her. And in the European version of the film, because the director also did an American version where it's changed around as to what happens at the end, but basically he never finds his wife. But he does learn what happened to her, because the killer like buried her alive. And so he buries the guy alive, and so he finds out what happened, but he dies. It's like
basically to get closure on that mystery, he has to die
in order
to find out
it.
because he gets killed in the exact same way that she got killed, and that's how he figures it out. It's a really, really great film, but I think Ebert and Siskel are way off on this one, because I actually did go reading reviews, because after I watched, by the time we get to the halfway point of this film and it turns into a little bit of a heist actioner where they make him go into his bank and try to like pull out $90,000, and then you get a lot of like from that point on, the movie is kind of like layers of scheming and kind of like almost like a little bit of like that double crossing that you get in heists, where like he's faking how much money he has with the guy. He's like, these are all singles, and he's like flipping out, and then you get full blown like action revenge movie where he's climbing along the bottom of the truck and riding the side of the truck, and then you get
that's where you see a kid.
Yeah,
that's where you see a kid. That's a great little gag when he's climbing under the bottom of the truck, and it's just like this car drives by, and there's this kid looking out the window just at him, like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And it's like, I guess that's sort of the Spielberg moment of there's a kid and stuff, and it's just like the kid is like, "Huh?" It's a great little moment.
But then it transitioned into like that a little bit of, again, back into horror in like a vaguely home invasion type thing where he's the one breaking into the house and interrupting the family and all of this. And as it went kind of like on and on and on, I was kind of like blown away as it transitioned every single time, the way until its endpoint, which you talked about, the big ending. And so I had to read about the film when I kind of saw about all this. And the most prominent review I found was Ebert's, which had him recommend, that it was a really tight, entertaining thriller. But he had a big thing at the end of it where he basically went off on the closing moments of the film, that it involves a situation where the villain is, already powerless, and they kill him anyway, basically. not in any kind of self-defense, out of anger. And he says, I noticed, interestingly, that no one in the audience cheered when that final death took place. I felt a kind of collective wince. Maybe that indicates we still have an underlying decency that rejects eye for an eye values of this film. Breakdown is a fine thriller, but its ending is unworthy. Like he's decrying that it's an immoral act. And instead of questioning the fact that the movie agrees with him and wants to say that that's where these people have been pushed to, and that moment is supposed to make you kind of feel uncomfortable about what otherwise would have been a traditional revenge action ending. Instead, he goes, people are just more decent, and not that the film was meant to make them uncomfortable in any kind of way, which kind of just blew my mind when I read that, because I couldn't disagree more with a take.
Yeah. Well, it's that constant, we have that argument not argument, but that discussion all the time where it's kind of like, just because a movie has something in it doesn't mean that it advocates for that idea.
Well, no,
it's
and especially when he's being like, the
working.
movie made the audience feel uncomfortable, and he registered that. And I was like, he just doesn't understand. Like,
that was the intent.
It didn't occur to him that might be the intent after that big ending climax, which for me in particular, I thought that the ending was completely awesome, because when you get that action scene of all these cars driving side by side, and you get almost like what felt to me like a Mad Max style like confrontation between the locals and him, and he's been reduced to this revenge action hero at this point, but then it's just screaming metal and smashing into each other, and then the truck's hanging off the side, and it's almost abstract in how it's been cut together in this way, when it's just like the tires spinning and the engines pushing over the edge of the bridge, and it's just like close-ups on their eyes and their sweat while they're duking it out, and it's this very satisfying revenge story. And then obviously it ends that with just this sudden like point of no return darkness that you don't expect, and then it leaves you with that. It's just like,
because the wife doing that, I mean, you understand exactly why she would do that, having been on the receiving end of what she received. But I mean, there is in that moment a kind of like, I feel like an implicit moral choice to be made there. And she decides to do the thing of like, well, honey, we're killing this motherfucker,
He is not going to kidnap anybody else.
He put me in a freezer, goddammit.
Look, I mean, I will tell you this. I do cheer, but I don't cheer JT Walsh's death. I cheer just the pure sense of like utter satisfaction in just the technique of kind of the truck used as sort of a punctuation mark on this entire thing.
Quite literally, as she
that line squishes
she
the
pulls the lever, he's sitting on the rock below the bridge, and the truck just smushes right onto the rock, crushes him.
I mean, I love the sound design of it. How there's that beat, there's that kind of extended beat of silence. How it kind of is just focused on Kurt Russell looking shocked. Which I think is just like, he's not looking at it as like, thank God he's dead or something. It's kind of like he can't believe what he's seeing, and then when they hug each other,
badass.
Well, and then when they hug each other, it's kind of like he's looking at her like he can't believe what just happened, and then they sit down in what I always like it. Maybe this is my lapsed Catholicism coming into, but I love the Pietà kind of pose when it was like the Virgin Mary holding Christ or something, and it's just like. I don't really read love into how they're holding each other. They just seem like these inhuman shells.
It feels more like relief that it's over, but they do feel like there's some emptiness.
They did some shit for sure.
Yeah.
And they saw some things.
They went to places they didn't want to personally go.
And I mean, honestly, I think to some degree that is illustrative of shall we say a middle class yuppie fear. Of not wanting to be pushed to anything extreme, and really of when you are, and I'm not necessarily saying that you necessarily will be, but that if you find yourself in some situation where you are pushed to an extreme, it can so fully take your humanity that you never recover. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think it's kind of like another. It's another kind of existential thing after Duel, although Duel is in a vein of like, a 70s American cinema that's different from a 90s American cinema. which even now it's interesting how people are reclaiming a lot of 90s American cinema, especially like the erotic thrillers and other things from that era, which are really trashy. And
we already did Basic Instinct on the show. Danny Bowes brought Basic Instinct on, so we're responsible a little bit in part.
And I mean it's fine. I know a lot of people who I think are probably more on Ebert's side of Breakdown than I am. I mean, actually, this is probably the point at which I say, maybe Josh, you knew this, but I actually put Breakdown on my best of all time Sight and Sound ballot list.
I did not know that.
It was my 1990s choice.
Did you get any pushback on that one?
Actually, I think people, because I paired it with things like Spies by Fritz Lang and L'Âge d'Or by Louis Buñuel and The Young Girls of Rochefort by Jacques Demy and Certified Copy by Abbas Kiarostami. So it's just kind of like I'm looking at all this and I'm like, I want a genre piece here. And what's the one that's given me like all this pleasure, forever and ever? And I mean, on one level, there would be The X-Files, which, is my ultimate, one of my great works of art of all time. But, that it was just kind of like, no, I Breakdown is the film like, and this is where I got into and I can see how it's actually kind of related to Spielbergian aesthetics, which I think reshaped Hollywood to a major degree, positive, maybe more negatively than positively, because he's one of those artists like Quentin Tarantino is also, who what they do is so unique to them, and yet it became the dominant mode, and basically everyone who's trying to do what they do are imitators. They can't capture, the intangible thing that makes them them.
Did you watch Bad Times at El Royale too?
I did not watch Bad Times at El Royale.
I will say that I didn't hate it, but I sat there the whole time going, why would I want to watch this over a Tarantino movie the entire time?
Oh, okay.
It was just that kind of experience.
It's such an homage that it's just kind of like it's not doing anything.
It's beyond that.
It's not doing anything individual like at all.
Well, no, you just realize how little character there is inherent in the style that they choose that they don't infuse themselves, and you're kind of like, again, imitation is the right word.
Yeah.
So I guess this is where it comes in, is that there is a degree to which Breakdown is derivative of a certain kind of filmmaking, I suppose, that became the dominant mode. At the same time, I also feel, and I think the reason I feel like it's unique, is that it feels to me in some way like an epitaph. Or a requiem for that kind of mode of filmmaking as well, in a large degree because I can't detect any CG effects in the movie. I don't really know where they are. I know they're listed in the credits, but it might just be backgrounds or erasing certain things or whatever. But this feels
sparks
very
of the steel or something, steel on steel,
or something. But the explosions seem real. I know the truck hanging on the bridge. Some of that is miniature, but I really love good miniature work, and I think that's excellent miniature work in large part too because of the sound design, because of the beats of when the crunch of the metal comes and everything, and that there's silence in between, which allows you to kind of register things more rather than it's just cacophonous sound all the time or something like that. I mean, also if you just see where Mostow went subsequently, and I don't mind some of his later movies, like I like that. I basically like the Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is like Buster Keaton's College, in that it's just a comedy for most of its run, and then it's the bleakest ending you could possibly imagine. because in College it's like Buster Keaton like goes through like a romance and all these other slapstick scenes, and then he gets the girl at the end, but then the ending is that you see them advance in age to marriage, to having kids who are irritating them, to old age where they don't really seem like they're communicating anymore, to the last shot, which is their gravestones next to each other and the music going dun 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 dun. and it's all like in this montage that actually, funny enough, if you haven't done Zardoz on your podcast yet, the ending of Zardoz is exactly what College is, just with Sean Connery and I think Charlotte Rampling. So I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing to me to kind of to watch kind of Mostow's later career, and where the CG stuff that is really part of the Hollywood machine now. And Josh, I think you were the one who posted the image from Avengers: Infinity War of Mark Ruffalo's head within the gigantic Iron Man suit. And like this is an image from a Hollywood film in 2018 or whatever the fuck it is, and I'm just
it was the highest grossing movie of the year, and, and the most expensive. And I was
Yeah.
like, really? This is like what
This is what you got?
This is just what we accept as like good popular filmmaking.
I
now?
recently had to rewatch Triple X State of the Union because it's a rewatch on my list, and yeah, it was bad. And the CGI legitimately looked like that scene in Avengers, and that was with Ice Cube, the sequel to Triple X. So need I say more? It was bad to compare those two.
And this is not me railing against CG either. I think there are the thing of CG is that I think you really probably should not go for photorealism with it. You should go for it with like an expressive unrealness. That's what's interesting about it, is that it is unreal. There is a weightlessness to it, and how do you like incorporate that into photography of something real? And I think that's an interesting thing in and of itself. Albeit again, when it becomes a dominant mode, you're pretty much assured that you're going to get a lot of bad iterations of it. And I think ultimately, like Mosto, actually, his most recent film, I think, was this is not a CG issue, but it's kind of like it's just another thriller, although this time with Sam Worthington.
Oh yeah, no, I think I heard about that one. Is that the Hunter's Prayer one?
The Hunter's Prayer, right. And actually, there is a similar child comes in with a weapon gag that was like in Breakdown, and it doesn't work at all. And it's just kind of sad now. I just feel like, you can see some of Mosto's talent for just staging action, but and I think he does have an eye for that. But I just think whatever thematic stuff is in Breakdown, I think comes a little more from just the circumstances. Not to say Mosto didn't have anything. I just didn't have any effect on that. I just don't feel like. I don't know that there's much, going on like internally in terms of meaning for him that he wants to express beyond just creating, something entertaining. So I feel like the moment of this movie, the performance of Kurt Russell, who I just think is, the perfect kind of person for this. And the fact that he did this, the fact that he did this the year after Escape from LA, where he played Snake Plissken again, is very interesting. You can see the dichotomy of like that. And I think in 97 or maybe it was 98, his next one was going to be like Soldier.
The Paul Thomas, Paul W.S. Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
Very different filmmakers.
Very different filmmakers, yes.
Yeah, so I mean,
but I've seen Soldier. It's pretty funny.
You just get a sense of like his range and what he can do to that. And I think him playing the yuppie, you're talking about his khaki pants, and I'm laughing because he wears it convincingly, but it's like you could tell how the clothes are informing the character, and how. Yeah. And how then ultimately, as a result, it's a suit of armor to one degree, and then it has to get torn and tattered and bloodied, and he becomes primal. And Kurt Russell is very good at that kind of primal stuff, I think he's very good at kind of like being a guy who's like, well, I don't want to do the primal stuff. And I actually feel like he was trying to stretch a little bit with that in this. I think he does it really beautifully. And and then ultimately where it ends is he's just, who is he? I don't think he's human anymore. I don't think he and his wife are human anymore because they made certain choices. You can say to some degree that they were pushed to that. At the same time, I think you can also read it as like, they fucked up these people's life. Admittedly, these people are killers, but they had a thing going. And they had a thing going.
That's a good way of saying it.
And JT Walsh was supporting it. JT Walsh was supporting his family.
And he was helping his buddies out. He was giving his buddies jobs.
Jobs? This guy's making jobs. This guy's making the economy happen, man. That's hilarious.
He's making jobs. So it's just like, I mean, but I mean, think about like, that kind of futzing with your identification with who is the hero here and how this movie kind of plays with that. It gives you what you want. It gives you good guys, bad guys, but it also gives you other things that I think are there. Maybe if that's not necessarily coming from Mosto, it's certainly coming from the performances. And I think, casting JT Walsh is a key factor of that, as I think casting Kurt Russell is. I think they're perfectly matched in that way. I mean, and then there are like all these other character actors who kind of pop up, like Rex Lynn is the sheriff, I think, and I forget the name of the guy who owns the diner, but who has the gun behind. I don't have to show you jack shit and all that, but I've seen. I think he was like he was on the series Rescue Me with Dennis Leary for a while, and he's kind of a jobbing character actor and stuff, and so there's a lot of what people call that guys, in this movie. And,
that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that face.
Yeah, or like, you know, or I also like Jack Noseworthy, a great name, who is Billy. You know, he first seems like he's the redneck out of Deliverance and stuff, and what you realize ultimately is that he's playing on Kurt Russell's character's prejudices. You know, he's like, oh, you think this is you think this is what all rednecks are or something, and then he's like, and then he opens
because he's the one who tricks him and says, I saw some guys go that way.
I saw some guy go that way. I'm getting my trucker's license and all this. You know, he's playing up the redneck thing to such a hilt, and then when he finally confronts him and he like takes off the hat and his hair like drops down and he suddenly gets like really cruel and stuff. It's just like, oh, you know, okay, it's like the shifting of identities and stuff too is really interesting, I think, and in how, you know, the villains play on really the prejudices of who ostensibly is supposed to be the hero. So, you know, I feel like there's a lot of that going on in there. The fact that I think it's produced by Dino De Laurentiis, I think probably, you know, gives you a certain sense that there was producerial input here as well. So
Dino.
they were. Yeah. I mean, there were probably a lot of cooks in the kitchen to some degree, but they actually turned out something that I think happens to be a great fucking movie.
Well, yeah,
so,
and I would say to your point about how this feels like it's, you know, kind of taking inspiration from all these different kinds of these, you know, so like exploitation and Duel and things like this. I think the thing that blew me away the most about the movie was that how often it would shift into a different mode. Yeah. It would shift into an action. It would shift into a revenge. It would shift into a vaguely horror-ish.
And it's pretty seamless.
And yeah, not only is it seamless, but it also constantly found interesting ways to shade what is an incredibly, again, another very simple story. It's a a simple narrative, but the second you transition both in filmmaking mode and in you know, like a little bit of narrative, like when he has to go into the bank and he's sweating bullets and putting on a performance and all of this and not doing it very well at all. Yeah. But then all of a sudden he has to take control and he's fighting with the dude in the truck, and then all of a sudden he's riding the outside of the truck, like and then all of a sudden again in the big climax when we have steel on steel, it turns into this very it's Mad Max, but then also we get, you know, a lot of these more abstract steel on steel elements where it's like the engine revving over to the bridge and sparks are going off, and then it's a close-up of Kurt Russell's eyes and then a close-up of him like gripping a steel chain that he's about to use to fight the guy, and like, you know, the filmmaking gets animalistic as well as we get into that.
Yeah, no, also I would like to point out that I think another genre this kind of plays with a little bit is romantic comedy, very glancingly. But like,
the beginning and stuff,
Well, and actually, what I was going to say, one of my favorite moments, you know, and it's horrifying initially, like they take out the wife in the garage, you know, and you think for a moment like she's dead and everything, and you get this like intense look on Kurt Russell's face because he's spying all this, and you know they're talking about like burying her, this, that, and the other thing, and then she like kicks herself alive, and you know all the villains are like laughing and stuff, and then the wife like knocks or calls from the outside, and JT Walsh is like, oh shit, it's my wife, we gotta hide this quick. And it's
we gotta hide this woman's body.
Go. And it's like in a romantic comedy or something where like the spouse or something is trying to hide something from the wife or whatever, you know, the husband's trying to hide something from the wife.
It's
and
like
it's
the
just
house
like
that Jack built. Yeah. Slapstick of that.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a lot of things all at once, and there is a seamlessness to it. And I mean, it's interesting. I never thought of that term as applied to this, and especially just in the shifting identities, genre-wise, of this particular film, and how actually that speaks to some of its deeper meanings. So it's interesting. Thanks for bringing that up because I never thought of that before.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just shocked because at one point I'm enjoying this awesome action scene of Kurt Russell in khakis riding the outside of a tanker truck, and I'm like, this is awesome. And then next thing I know, we're having a comedic scene about what should otherwise be a horror scene and is framed as a horror scene. And then it's also complicated by that guy's relationship to his actual family, and is, again, how many different things actually end up getting into this very simple narrative kind of blew me away by the end.
Me too.
Yeah, also did you notice that when he reaches up, when he's about to climb up onto the ladder and of the truck as the truck is moving, Kurt Russell, I mean, and he reaches up to kind of grab the ladder and steady himself and pull himself up. He reaches up with the hand that has his wedding ring on it. And I think the camera slightly rack focuses so that you can just sort of glancingly see the wedding ring a bit better than his face. Yeah. So I mean, I didn't notice this until like several times into the movie, and then I was like, "Oh shit!" So they're like focusing on the wedding ring as well, you know. So that's where I get into the kind of like remarriage theme that I'm talking about as well. I mean, I think that that's kind of in there too, you know. So
that they've been separated and that they're getting back together, not necessarily in the way that they hoped, probably.
Yeah.
No. But you know, I mean, yeah.
No, it's awesome though, and I think that absolutely
not the best
applies.
way you want to spark up a marriage.
No, but I think that's interesting, and it complicates it again. I actually found this much more rich and complicated than I anticipated when I first started watching the film, and I will say that that's probably going to make me want to revisit the film, because as we kind of pivot to the reductive rating around here, this is actually going to get a pretty high 4 for me, honestly. Nice. And I think, I mean, I don't have Keith's relationship to the film, obviously, at this point, but I see why you would have that relationship with the film, and I have a feeling that this is gonna become a repeat viewing thing for me. Nice. And I can see myself constantly. Again, I feel like there was so much little tiny shading and details that happened during the transitions from filmmaking mode and narrative mode that it made me feel like I'm gonna get more out of it when I eventually do revisit it again. So
yeah, because the first time you're almost just shocked at all these twists.
I was
and turns.
shocked. I actually had to go back and repeat scenes sometimes just to make sure that I saw what I saw. Well, yeah, when the family stuff happened, especially when the mom said "do it," and then the scene happened, I had to go back and be like, did she just say that? Because that was not what I expected.
While she did that?
And I had to do it again with the very, very ending, because I don't know if I quickly glanced away or I didn't see the wife do it, but I was like, why did that truck just fall on him? And then I went back and saw that the wife literally pulls the gear so that it goes off the bridge and lands on him in this really horrifying way. And again,
which I actually believe in some international cuts of the film, that shot is removed. So the truck just falls by itself.
Cool.
There are other cuts, I think, that might have had to be edited for international consumption, or maybe something else, or maybe it's the TV, the TV edit or something like that. But I think there does exist, and not at Mostow's or anyone involved with the films, I think, real desire beyond a kind of censorship thing. And so, I mean, there are some cuts somewhere, I think, in the world where that shot is removed, and I do think that kind of would hurt a lot of what we're talking about. I think it's so essential that she does the coup de grace.
Yeah,
so
no,
speak.
absolutely, absolutely. For you, Jamie,
I'm also gonna give it the 4. Yeah. It was really the last 20 minutes that just ramps it up for me. I was really enjoying it. It's just the fact that it went balls to the wall.
Well, even just the second half when it transitions into the heist action to then the more road action, and then you have a bit of the revenge stuff mixed in with the horror stuff.
It's all seamless. You'd think that they'd be a little bit jarring or sporadic, but it's very seamless. They do it very well. They pace it out well. And then you also believe that even Kurt in his khakis would get to the point where he would be like, you know what, I'm getting my wife, you motherfuckers. And he's traveling at the bottom of a semi-truck on a high-speed chase and or just the highway. And just to go into a horror element, and then to complicate the
whole
villain
home
with his
invasion
family
thing, where he's invading the killer's home, and you're getting it from his point of view as he's watching the normalcy of what it is for these kidnappers / killers. Yeah, and again, it blows my mind that it goes straight from that truck scene of him climbing on the side of the truck to that home scene.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they're so completely different, and they kind of complicate each other. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, and then as soon as he gets there, he's made that decision that he is going, hard on them. I mean, he goes in, busts in with the gun. Then you have the kid, so you know that the villain has taught his kid to shoot. There's just a lot of complications that I didn't think they were going to get into. Well, especially waiting for the last 15 minutes of the film.
And I was going to say, you talking about how he kind of finally is like, I'm going to really, really yell and confront, and I'm going to do it this time. Because the first time he confronts him, when he pulls him over off the side of the road, he finds the trucker. He drives next to the trucker. He makes him pull over, and he's like, hey, you took my wife. Like, where'd you drop her off? Like, where is she?
Yeah, and he's like, I don't know who you are, man.
Yeah, well, and what's awesome about that, and that it kind of leads to a little bit of the paranoia aspect of it. I loved that, and I had to go back and watch it again to make sure too, because I was like, he looks different. Why does he look different? Because it's still J.T. Walsh, but in the first scene, he doesn't have glasses, and he's wearing a completely different shirt. So than the second scene, where he's
I had that same thing. So like, is it the same actor?
It's like 1 hour later, and he's changed his shirt and put on glasses and like tightened the way that his hat fits on his head. And
just enough. It's almost like he's trying to psychologically fuck with Kurt himself. Like, am I the same guy?
Yeah,
but
it's also in the filmmaking, right? Because I watched it.
Yeah, I did the same.
Yeah, I did the
you
same
react the
thing.
same way.
Yeah.
It is very smart. But yeah, so for me, I'm gonna give it a 4, and I'm looking forward also to rewatching this bad boy because I just didn't expect it to be as complicated as it turned out to be.
Yeah, so. and there's so many details in it that, despite the fact that Duel, the sort of like the stripped down nature of it and how tightly wound it is as like an entertaining action piece.
Yeah.
That there are character details in this that really, really throw you off.
Yeah, they're very subtle too. Like if you're not paying attention, I mean, but there's a lot of depth if you just look into it.
Yeah, and Keith would make that argument. So Keith, for you, what are we looking at here?
I mean, you're probably going to be shocked as hell that I give it a 5.
Yeah,
but. No, I mean, I don't know, Josh, if in your research you found the video that Kevin Lee, a friend of mine, shot of me and him watching Breakdown several years ago.
No, I didn't.
And he edits like, I mean, it's not, we did watch the full movie and he recorded it all, but it's basically like a 10-minute video. So he selected highlights of our reacting to things, especially me reacting.
I just Googled it. I see it here.
There you go. So yeah, I mean, I will never watch it fully. I'm somewhat embarrassed, but you can see me act like a blubbering idiot on video, and and I think a commenter actually said on there, because I unfortunately did see a comment that was like, I don't think this works. You don't seem like you're being genuine. And I was like, go fuck yourself. Yeah, like I was like Jennifer Jason Leigh when the Polish accountant comes up in Twin Peaks: The Return, and she's like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, I'm watching this video now, and I'm watching these scenes of like the scene of where he's trying to pull the truck driver over, and then the sort of like the other vehicle pulls up in the oncoming lane, and it cuts to him like swerving out of the way to miss it, and you can just see your face going like
Yeah. No. I mean, I knew I was being filmed, so maybe I guess that probably does change certain things, especially for someone who tends not to have any or does not have any training in terms of being in front of a camera. And if one is aware, I guess maybe that can change things. But I mean, honestly,
I was going to say, if anything, you're probably actually trying to contain it a little bit.
Yeah.
Being aware of the camera.
That might actually be reading too. But I mean, there's few movies where like when I watch them, it's like they bring me back to that kind of same level of excitement, that was there upon first encounter, upon maybe even, let's say, encounter and initial run. I feel like sometimes you can watch a movie over and over again, like the first time it's released, and then you kind of step away from it, and then maybe many years later you come back and you really don't recapture that sense of it. But I've had some spaced out areas between viewings of this sometimes, but every time I've come back, every time it's just like it brings me, in that way, I guess it is the Proustian Madeline of like, it's like dropping the cake into the tea, and you smell the aroma, and it's just like you're immediately back in it, and it's not.
I mean, everyone's got those movies. Everyone's got that one where it's like you don't know necessarily that you could make the argument for another person's viewing experience of it.
Yeah.
But like that for you, that every time you're in love with the movie. Like, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just. I mean, that's what it is for me. I'm never not who I am when I watch it. It's not like I suddenly become who I was in 1997. But it's just like there's something. It accesses certain emotions and feelings and things that I feel like are outside of time. And that's really interesting when you find the movies that do that, or the artists who do that, where it's almost like you're engaging with them or with the thing itself, with the object itself, just like outside of proscribed time. And it's like that, I love that sense because, I think it's like Jacques Rivette talking about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, where he said he had no idea what was going on, but he left the theater feeling 10 feet above the ground. It's like, it's like that. It's like that's what, a lot of the great movies are for me. It's like, I don't know that it's necessarily fully losing one's sense of self, because I think you really do have to come back to your sense of self and kind of grapple with whatever it was you were feeling. But
in retrospect, you're still going to engage with your feelings and how they. Yeah.
But I do feel like it augments my reality. It does actually lift me up. That thing in the Manny Farber, the critic who wrote his Precepts, where he says the last thing that he wants, the last thing he writes on that list is that he wants to give the audience some uplift. And I don't necessarily think that just means making them feel good. I think it means like literally bringing them to a state of transcendence of some kind, because actually that will then help them live better. And so it's like, I feel like that's what great art does. And, great art, I think a lot of people sometimes shame genre for not being, the highfalutin, having a highfalutin aura about it, that maybe many associate with great art. But I think great art can come from anywhere, and you have to search for it. When you find it, it's like there's nothing better. And so, both these movies are kind of that.
Well, I don't think anyone that loves Breakdown could possibly be any kind of snob.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's possible,
right.
because there is something so animalistic about the big bridge climax where the tire is crushing over top of the hood of their vehicle and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And these people are hanging off the side, beating each other to a pulp, despite the fact that one of them is going to fall off at any second. And it's just, I gotta say, I was pretty swept up in the finale so much that it made me want to almost instantly rewatch it again. So
Great. Yeah,
I'm glad that you brought it. Thanks for bringing both these films.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. And thank you for having me.
All right. That will wrap it up for this week's episode, I think. That was Steven Spielberg's Duel, 1971, and Breakdown, 1997, it was?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You got it, John Mostow. Keith, this is the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug, you can do it here.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we sort of did the pre-show plug of my Glass review at Slant Magazine. If you look in Hollywood Reporter in the coming months, you'll see me on some Sundance titles. You can review a lot of festivals remotely nowadays, so they have some people on the ground there, but they're also asking others who can see screenings like in New York and LA to kind of cover some of the other titles. So you'll find some of the reviews there. So Slant, a Hollywood Reporter. Sometimes I've written for Mubi Notebook, which where I did a bunch of recaps of Twin Peaks and the X-Files, the most recent series of both of those. And beyond that, I'm hoping to get some books out of me at some point. So I hope down the line you all will see a Jonathan Demme book from me, an X-Files study, a book that I hope to actually write at some point that puts together Spielberg, Godard, and Sam Fuller's filmographies and kind of like compares and contrasts, because Sam Fuller worked with both of them. In 1941, he plays a general with Steven Spielberg, and of course he's in Pierre Le Fou by Godard. So that's an idea that I hope maybe will someday come to fruition. Additionally, this podcast had made me realize that I really do want to write a monograph on Breakdown.
Do it.
So I guess I've now confessed to your audience certain projects that I hope to will come to fruition. You can also find like just me generally at keithulick.com. My site is called The Completist. That's a term my friend Matt Zoller Sites gave to me, and I liked it so much because I think it's an impossible goal. No one can ever be completist on anything, and so I think it's playing a bit with irony. But there you'll find
we're getting there though. We're trying.
Yeah, there you'll find some articles I just wrote for the site, as well as an archive that I'm ever expanding of all my work ever. Which
I can definitely recommend
sometime soon.
I can definitely recommend all of Keith's writing to you guys. He's one of my favorite people to read. And I can also recommend, now this is going to be coming out soon, right? You and Labuza, the Cinephiliacs.
Yes.
Best of the Year episode is going to come out. It is my go-to Best of the Year list. That anything that makes that list, I make a point in watching before. Just because they kind of ignore any kind of broad sort of acceptance on what the best films with the year with, and just choose gems. Their stuff.
Yeah.
Whether that includes a TV series, whether that includes, I mean, Keith, you're going to talk about Ready Player One, right?
Yes, my list is already listed on my personal site, but my number one, I will tell you both, is a tie between Ready Player One and Abbas Kiarostami's 24 Frames.
See,
so yeah.
He's going to make the argument that Ready Player One was the best one. So, and I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to listen to it. Personally, I did like it.
I did too.
I wasn't one of these people who really, couldn't stand the material
I
and just use
had
that as a way
fun.
to, kind of shoot the movie down. But I am very interested in what it's the best film of the year argument is, and I will devour that as soon as it's out.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Peter's an old friend, and we do this every year. And his podcast, The Cinephiliacs, is something I think almost anyone with an interest in movies should listen to. But every year, basically, we do get together and kind of do we share our top tens and have a very, very long, like 2-part discussion. So
awesome.
But it seems a lot of people who listen to it really like it. So that's another place you can find me. And my last name is unique enough that I think if you just type it into Google, you'll pretty much just get results on me. So
absolutely, yep. And the spelling will be in the title of this episode, so we'll be able to figure that one out.
Yes, thank God I wasn't named Smith. So
yeah, Keith Smith wouldn't have done it. Couldn't have found you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Keith. For our audience, the next episode you can expect from us in 1 week's time will be for patrons. That's our bonus episode going up in 1 week. And we are sticking in the realm of Dino De Laurentiis produced historic angled films.
Yeah.
We are going to talk Conan the Barbarian.
Absolutely, we are.
We're making a left turn. We make all kind of left turns on this show. So we're going to be talking Conan the Barbarian by John Milius. That's what we're going to be talking, as well as the sequel Conan the Destroyer, both 80s Arnold Schwarzenegger high fantasy films produced by Dino De Laurentiis. That's what patrons you can expect next week. Jamie and I both watched them both for the first time, so
I did a double feature last night.
We'll see how that goes. But in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be back with a free episode for everyone, wherever you're listening, and we're going to be talking Jacob's Ladder.
Nice.
Because there is
one I've seen.
Yeah, and one I haven't seen.
Oh my God. This might be the first of the show.
Yeah, Jamie's seen something I haven't. From 1990, directed by Adrian Lin and starring Tim Robbins. But we're going to be pairing it with a sort of another traumatized Vietnam War story, and we're going to be talking the underrated war film by Brian De Palma, Casualties of War.
Very excited. Love me some De Palma.
So in 2 weeks' time, we are returning to Vietnam, and that's what you can expect. I think it's going to be in time for whenever the Jacob's Ladder remake is, which I probably won't be watching, but it's always nice when our show matches up with what the current zeitgeist is trying to force on everyone. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I hope it's good.
So that's what you guys can expect. As always, thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, y'all.